Hey guys, BMI here today with another tournament and meta update. So the first set of Japanese tournament results have finally come in, and both of them had over 200 players. So we're going to be covering the top deck lists from those tournaments. We're going to give you an overview of the meta, and we're going to go through the tier list. So whether you're grinding for the chest event, or you're looking to compete in tournaments like the Shadowverse Open this weekend, you're not going to want to miss this video. So let's get right into it. So as you can see, we're currently on www.shadowversemaster.com, where we've uploaded the top performing deck lists from the two tournaments we'll be covering today. So the first tournament we'll be covering is the Gorilla Cup number 11. So unfortunately, this tournament has fallen victim to another insect infestation problem. So Roach Forest is unfortunately not dead. So it did get a few new powerful cards. So the first one covers Ambush from Above. So this card is a 1 play point silver spell from the new set. Basically, you do 2 damage to a random enemy follower, and if you combo 3, it does it 2 times instead. So basically, it means that your opponent can't really aggro you early game as long as you have a somewhat playable hand. And then turn 3, you can do stuff like double fairy, ambush from above, clear their board, and then you have 2 more fairies to do whatever you like with it. And then they have to clear those fairies too. So you gain a lot of control over the early game, but even in the mid and late game, you can still manipulate it. So you can clear their board semi and then make sure that no matter what the target hits, you'll still be able to clear their board. And then, of course, on the actual Roach lethal turn, it's a 1 play point spell, which means that you can just play it to get your counter up, so you can go for the OTK lethal. So this card is very flexible, and it's strong in the context of a meta where there's a lot of aggressive decks. Unfortunately, it doesn't really do much against Ward Haven, for instance, and so Ward Haven has been conspicuously missing, and that's because it's a bad deck, to be honest, but it does beat Roach really hard. So you might see more Ward Haven as a response to Roach later on, but at the moment, we're not seeing much of it in the current meta. In addition, we are seeing 3 copies of the new gold spell, Garden's Allure. So this one is a very strong card for the overall fluidity of the deck. So essentially what this card does is you draw a card when you play it, but if you fuse to the card, you draw 2 instead. So this fusion effect, you can fuse at any time during your turn, once per turn, and it's any Forest Craft card. And so what you would typically run into when playing Forest is you run into these situations, right, where your hand would be sort of bricky, and you wouldn't be able to play out your high cost followers, right? So maybe you drew all of your 5 costs and above, and then you have to unbrick your hand, but all of those cards draw you cards, and so you can't improve your hand. But now that you have Garden's Allure, you can actually fuse those away and then draw cards, and then basically fix your hand incrementally. You don't have to play this card right after fusing it. You can fuse every single turn if you want to. And also, if you are running low on hand size, this card fixes that problem too, because you can fuse fairies from your fairy generators. And so fairies are usually pretty easy to generate, right? So you're almost getting like a plus 0.5 every time you play this card. So this card helps a lot in terms of consistency. It helps your hand management capabilities as well. And overall, it's just a very strong card for Roach Forest, and it is contributing heavily to why this deck is once again resurfacing as a top tier option. And then finally, we see 1 copy of Limaga Untamed Wild. So this card, it is a one-of because of the fact that essentially, even though you can play it without Super Evo, in most circumstances, you don't really want to do that, right? I mean, even if 2 followers can't attack, you're not clearing them really, and then if they Super Evo your Limaga, you're behind. So in most cases, you would have to Super Evo it, so that those 2 followers also take 2 damage per turn. So it's both your turn and your opponent's turn, and the enemy leader takes 1 damage. So you want to pick a follower where basically ideally it has like around 5 or 6 HP. That way on your turn it does 2 damage, on their turn it does 2 damage, on your turn it does 2 damage, right? And then you actually get 3 ping damage to the enemy leader per time, per follower that has 5 or 6 HP. If they don't have ward, then they're almost guaranteed to just take 1 billion damage, right? So this card actually is quite potent in certain situations. But you can't run more than 1 or 2 because of the fact that it is quite dead. And Roach really does compete for the Super Evo slot a lot. So cards like Olivia, obviously, if they run it. Cards like Aria, if they run it. And of course, Carbuncle. This card really does want a Super Evo point as well. So you can't run too many cards that use Super Evo points. But apart from that, this deck plays mostly the same as it did before. Obviously, clear the board every single turn until you eventually can chip them with Roach and then kill them the following turn. So Pixie Forest still remains a very, very strong deck. Next up, we have Puppet Portal. So this one is quite an interesting construction. So I know last time when we covered the deck, we were running 3 copies of the new legendary, but this particular guy decided he's not running any of the new Portal legendaries. All he's running is 1 copy of Odin, which is of course a very strong card. You just kill a follower, swing for 4, and then suddenly they're in double Orcus range, or double Liam, or whatever. So I think the Odin makes a lot of sense. In addition, they've kind of run 1 copy of Via, so this card's just really sticky in general. We don't really see it too often. I don't think you can really run that many copies of it. It's situationally a strong card, so I mean, it's fine to run 1 copy. They brought back 1 copy of Divine Thunder. I think that makes sense, right? I mean, it's generic removal. It can clear stuff like Lamaga, Urius, anything really, right? And then you can use the puppets to clear the cards that have been chipped by 1 damage, so makes sense. And apart from that, we're running the standard kind of puppet cards, so I don't think there's anything too new about this particular puppet build. Every once in a while, puppet is just randomly good against certain decks, but I guess it's no surprise they lost to Forest in the finals, right? Forest has a very good matchup into puppet. The next deck, we have another Pixie Forest deck. So this one was top 4 as well. I think I made an entry mistake. But anyway, so this deck is a little bit different from the previous one. So they're still running 3 copies of Ambush from Above. But they're not running the Limaga. Instead, they're opting for 2 copies of Titania, Queen of Fairies. So this card is also quite strong in my opinion. It might be personal preference. So essentially, when you play this, you get a fairy. So and also you get the crest as well. And so unlike a lot of other followers, you get the crest as long as you play it. You don't have to evo it, for instance. And then its crest effect is at the start of your turn, you add a fairy to your hand. So that helps it, so like your hand size is always quite high. And then when you're going to set up for the lethal turn, you have a lot of 1 play point cards within your hand, and you don't really have to manage as hard to do that. In addition, it has an evolve effect where you can select an enemy fall on the field and transform into a fairy. This is quite strong against cards with last word effects, or just really difficult to answer cards. Like, I mean, if they have a particularly annoying last word, so like hidden behind a bunch of wards, stuff like that. It's a resource card, I would say, rather than a removal card, but it does a lot of random stuff. And then it helps you kind of always have that 1/1 rush in after playing this. So I think it's fairly strong. So overall, this deck would function almost exactly the same. Roach hasn't really changed fundamentally. So we'll go to our next deck, which is Artifact Portal. So the new cards they've added, Flight of Icarus. So this card is basically a card that ensures that Artifact will never really run out of resources. So if you play this early, you give an Artifact fall in your hand, rush, and last word. So you give this to one of your 5 costs. And then you basically copy and put that to the field every time. And then when it dies, you draw a card. So Artifact, it didn't really run up cards before, but now it definitely doesn't. And the rush effect is actually useful. So you can give it to, for example, your 3/5 healing Artifact, and then you can use it to crash into something. So you can like Evo Alouette, bring out the heal Artifact, trade with that, and you don't have to go for the AoE. And the stats are a lot better on that, right, against aggro decks. So that's an example. Some people are running Artifact Catapults. So basically, this one is a 2 play point, add a Gear of Ambition to your hand, but afterwards you can just engage it for 3, and you can copy an Artifact follow in your hand and bring it out. And this does combo with, it's similar to, like Doomright Resonance, but this does combo with the new card, so Carnelia. So this card, basically, when you evolve it, an Artifact follow in your hand gains ward and can't be destroyed by abilities, and that does include Artifact Catapult's effect, so it no longer dies at the end of a turn. So effectively, you are just paying 5 play points to get a 5 play point Artifact from your hand that's there permanently. And then if you have Flight of Icarus as well, it also draws a card when it dies, and it's got Rush. So this card is quite good when you're running all of the new package. Apart from that, I think they are running 3 copies of Cruella. So Cruella makes sense. This card is kind of broken, right? I mean, 6 play points. You don't need any Evos in order to get the Artifact out. It's conditionless, but if you do Super Evo this card, you can clear your opponent's type board. They take 2 chip damage, and then you can use your Artifact to do whatever, right? So obviously you run 3 copies of Cruella. And then finally, we've got 1 copy of Sylvia. So this one might go up or down depending on the meta. I wouldn't be surprised to see this go up, considering how important it is to be at high HP against almost all the decks of the current meta. So that's Artifact for you. It hasn't had... Okay, so it's got fundamental changes in terms of how you play the mid-game. The fact that now, you don't run out of card resources, you can play a much grindier game. And I think it has a lot of implications in the mirror as well, where you often did kind of... you had to play a value game, but now, now that you're both drawing cards infinitely with Flight of Icarus, it will change the dynamic of the matchup quite a bit. But yeah, that's the Gorilla Cup. So 2 Roach decks in the finishes, and Puppet Forest and Artifact. So it's sort of diverse, but unfortunately Roach is back, guys. And so the next tournament is Odeado. So this one also had over 200 players. I think it had a much bigger prize pool as well. But this one I think was a 2-deck BO1 format. So you just pick the deck. that you think will perform best against your opponent's lineup. So Graz, he won the tournament. He brought Aggro Abyss and Spellboost Rune. So these are two very like polarizing decks, let's just say, right? So essentially, Aggro Abyss, you play this against anything that looks slow enough that will just crumble against aggro. So you'll cue this against Spellboost Rune, ironically, right? And then basically they die too quickly for them to like even get to Norman to heal. So that makes a lot of sense. So we'll cover this deck list. So they're running all the low play point cards. So obviously all the 1/1s that have bonus effects. This one adds bad to hand when it dies. This one gives you a ghost. I mean, you want to run all the good 1 costs, right? Because that allows you to stack the board, do damage incrementally, etc. 1 copy of Twin Blade Goblins is the one where if you super evil, if you have super evil follow on the field, you deal 4 damage to an enemy follow on fanfare. 3 copies of Rage of Serpents, obviously 3 damage to enemy face. Great for an aggro deck. We run 3 copies of Winged Servants, so it just lets you go wide with 2 bats and have Drain. I mean, it's fine. We have 2 copies of Arthros, so this one is a ward. Add 2 shadows to your cemetery when you play it. When you evo it, you pay 4 necromancy and you deal 2 damage to a random enemy follower. This is very good against decks which are weaker than you on board, and then you make it so like they have to trade into this, or when you bring it out, you can just basically kill their dudes, right? So, yep, obviously a great one. And then we have 3 copies of Beryl, Nightmare Incarnate. So this is only 3/3 2-drop in the entire game. That's the downside that you lose 3 HP, but it doesn't really matter when you're the more aggressive deck. So they're not going to be able to take advantage of the fact that you're lower HP, in which case you just do 3 damage to enemy face and you ignore their board, right? So, I mean, whatever. Like, this card's kind of strong when you draw on curve and your opponent has no out to it. We also have 3 copies of Devious Lesson Mummy. So this one again from set 1. So, basic set actually, but Necromancy 4, give this follow Storm. You can just super evo the enemy face in late game. 5 damage. They can't really do much about it. We run 3 copies of Shadow Crypt Memorial, set as shadows, and also when you engage it, you summon 2 copies of Ghosts. So this combos really well with cards like Exela. So Exela is a 4 play point 1/3 Storm, and it gains plus X0 based on the number of enemy followers in the field. So because you're going super wide every turn, and you can also use Shadow Crypt in order to buff that as well, this card's basically a finisher. It does a lot of damage. Its stats aren't the greatest, but when you're just rushing to kill the enemy leader, and if their leader like Spellboost, they can't really do much about it, right? Until they have at least an Greater. But by that point, they're already so low on HP that even a breeze will kill them. And they won't be able to reach Norman in time as well. So that's the general like theory. In addition, we run 1 copy of Bortos. This is the one where you get a crest and everyone takes 1 damage every turn. At the end of your turn, sorry. And then we've got 3 copies of Vuela. So this card is like a very strong tempo card. So 2/4 rush. If you play like a 2/2 and then like they play a 2/2 and then you play drop Vuela and you trade in, you are super ahead, right? So this card is quite strong. Also, you can combo this with you can play this for 3 and you can play the mummy for 2 and you can eat super with the mummy and they both gain +2. So you can clear their board while hitting face. So that's a very common combo that we see as well. And then we run 3 copies of Arrow and Moonstruck Vampire. So it just gives your storm, your Bat Storm. You can just hit face. And then we have 3 copies of Aggro Abyss. So this card is played in every Abyss deck, right? So it just does 7 damage to enemy followers. Basically clears their board, gives you the advantage, lets you kind of ignore their board earlier on. So you can play Aragavi to clear their entire board, right? And then finally, we have 3 copies of Odin. So, I mean, obviously we all expected this, right? So Odin is just, you can super evo with 7 damage to enemy face, clear the biggest threat, and then they have to clear Odin, but then they're scared of the second Odin. And if you have that, you just win the game. So Aggro Abyss, ladies and gentlemen, very simple deck to play, very strong. And worthwhile, actually, I think, to bring in a lineup to SPO because Spellboost, I think, will be quite popular, and Aggro Abyss has a good matchup into that. Next up, we have Spellboost Rune. So this one is another very strong deck, in my opinion. So, of course, we did get 3 copies of Norman, Adamant Alchemist. So a lot of decks in set 2 have opted for the Earthright package, even though they're Spellboost. And it's because of this card, because on Earthright 1, you can select a mode to activate. So all of the effects are good, but actually I really rarely see people use the second effect. Most of the time it's either for like double Guardian Golem against decks that can't easily clear, or they go for the double restore 4 HP or something, or maybe even a mix, right? But this can heal for 8 potentially with an Evo, so it makes it really hard to kill Spellboost. Like, if they stabilize, you're screwed in most cases, right? So Norman, of course, they're running this. 2 copies of Burgeon. So I described this earlier as additional copies of Aggro. It does very similar things, right? You evo it, you get a crest called Version Rejected Arts, and you get an Onion Patch every single turn. And Onion Patch's effect is basically it's a 1/1 token with Rush, and when it attacks, you also get one spell boost. It adds spell boost to your entire hand. So essentially, you're getting free spell boost every single turn. It's got Rush, helps you clear the board. On the turn it comes out, it's basically 6/6 and 8/8 in stats, right? Yeah, it's 8/8 in stats. So effectively, it's very comparable to Aggro, to be perfectly honest. I mean, Aggro is obviously still better, but this card is definitely not bad, especially on curve. And then, of course, actually, there are only 2 copies otherwise, Phage Light Ward. So this one I don't see too often on the ladder, but it does make sense. I mean, you run so many sigils, and this card is very strong. Like, it's on rate, basically. You can even play this before you can evolve. So if you're going first, you usually can't evolve, but this actually gives you an opportunity to stabilize against going second players. So this card is quite strong, in my opinion. And then apart from that, it's running all of the Earthright package. So 2-drop followers adds sigils to board. I don't think this should be surprising to anyone, to be perfectly honest, right? You need sigils in order to play your Earthright cards. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And then apart from that, you spell list as per usual, and then eventually, you can play Cool on 7, you can play Demonic Calls, etc. once they're spell list enough, and then you Dimension Call, use Satan in order to win the late game, Samira and stuff like that. So, I mean, this deck is like very similar to before. Like, even though it now uses an Earthright package, it is still about surviving the early game and then basically creating boards which are too difficult for the enemy to deal with. And then potentially a Kikaitis lethal, right? I think the key thing to call out though is we have card Flame Destroyer. So that card was always like, on the chopping block to get cut, because even though it's an 8/6 for 0 play points, it doesn't do anything early game. And in Shadowverse Worlds Beyond, there is like that issue where like every board is seemingly clearable. And also a spell boost, like you don't have enough Storm where like Flame Destroyer, even if it lands 8 damage to face, it doesn't mean you win the game, right? Like your Kuon only does 4 Storm damage with a Super Evo, so a little bit of chip damage doesn't end up impacting the game that much, which is why I think Flame Destroyer was obviously going to be in the cutting block. Okay, so moving on, we have Mid-Range Sword for second place. So Prim, like this is actually quite common at the moment, and I think even though I don't like this card that much, I will explain why people are playing it. So first of all, it's got Ambush, so 1/1. So at the moment, like there's a lot of cards that can like easily clear like the turn 2 play. And so if you play Prim, like those cards suddenly can't clear it, so you always have the 1/1 banked. And you can use that at any time. You can swing like the turn after, and then their removal, like if it's single target, they can't really kill both your new follower and the Prim, for instance. Also, like this card basically means like you can play Nonya and it's like slightly above rate in order to compensate for the fact that Prim is below rate. But also your hand size doesn't deplete. You're playing 2 cards, but it's only 1 card out of your hand, right? And then in addition, it's got a Super Evo effect. I don't think, I've only really used this like a single time, like, playing with it. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone else use the Super Evo effect, so it may as well not exist. But yeah, overall, and one other thing is Nonya is also an officer. So this combos with all of your Rush cards. So for instance, against Rush of Luminous Lance Trooper, and hypothetically will combo with Luminous Magus, but I think it's already got Ward, so I mean that doesn't mean anything. But yeah, anyway, this card, this same play, but I feel like Crouch Woman is better, to be perfectly honest. But to each their own. 3-cost Luminous Lance Trooper makes sense. One of the best 2-drops in the game. Again, Ignominious Samurai, one of the best late game 2-drops in the game, and it clears 2/2s, so what's not to like? 3 copies of Seria Gunslinger Maid. Again, this is because the current meta is extremely aggressive, and 2 pings onto 1 HP followers is actually quite strong. Especially if you're running cards like Prim, where basically you play the Prim and you can crash in, and then turn after you can play Seria to kind of bring back that tempo if you want to. 3 copies of Volse, again, is your removal, so you don't have to use Evo point, and you can snowball on turn 3. 3 copies of the new card Rose Princess Knight, so that's quite interesting. Like basically, if they trade into one of your followers and it's alive, you can use Rose to clear it without using Evo point. Occasionally, you'll have these situations where you don't want to fully commit to field, so you just play Rose and you search a follower, and you can use it later. So you can combo with like cards like Amelia, for instance. That's probably the most common use for it. And then you build a really wide board for a later turn, and they might not be able to answer it, right? Or something might stick, in which case you can kind of snowball from there. I mean, also, it just means that your hand size doesn't deplete. So this card is quite flexible in terms of its usage cases. So yeah, a lot of people are running 2 to 3 copies of this. Hound, of course, still a very strong card. Basically, in the hard sticks, it's, lets you clear a lot of boards without using Evo points. People are still running this. Although I think they cut it down to 2 because we're running too many 3 costs now, which makes sense. 3 copies of Zirconia. So this card works very well actually with Prim. So because they can't usually clear Prim, if the Prim is stealthed and on turn 4 you Evo this, get an extra 2/2. And usually people do all they can to prevent you from being able to get an extra 2/2, but now you're going to be able to start the turn with a 6/6, end the turn with a 6/6 and like 3 2/2s, right? And if they don't have like proper AoE for it, kind of hard for people to clear, so it doesn't make sense. 3 cards to Albert, no brainer, your finisher, you need to play this. 2 cards to Luminous Matches, so I think you should still be running 3 in the current meta, especially with decks like Roach coming out. And even the Mirror, but obviously still a strong card. 3 Amelia, make sure you don't run up hand size, strong tempo play. 3 copies of the new Anathema piece, Gildaria. So this card's one of the best cards of the new set. So I think my commentary on this before was like, space on the high end is going to be pretty tight if you want to run this card. So what they just did was they cut the other high end cards and played this, which in hindsight makes a lot of sense. So this card basically, it clears every board. Like there's hardly anything that this doesn't clear. Even like the really sticky like Wardhaven build boards, like Anathema Pace is very close to getting clear those, or at least like gives you a fighting chance to clear most of it, right? So this card's good even without the Rally 20 effect. But obviously in the super late game, getting free Super Evo is kind of insane too. Next up, we have 2 copies of Libya, Heroic Dark Angel. So again, it heals, lets you clear board, draws cards. What's not to like, right? And then 2 copies of Odin. So this is the new neutral legend. Again, we're going to see this a lot in various decks. So you just play it, clear the board, swing for the face, or you trade, whatever. Occasionally, you might be able to get like a super high value target with it as well. So, and also if your HP is high as sword, and then like, for example, say down like 16 or something, you just play this, kill the follower, swing for the face, and then like, shit, I suddenly die to Albert. So like this card like allows you to do like, it lets you do some crazy things, right? Whereas before, like people could reasonably go like, well, you know what, you're not going to be able to chunk me below like to 12 HP and not throw the game, but Odin lets you do that. And then we run 1 copy of Janna 11 Axe Raider. So this card was like really strong in the first set, but in this set, unfortunately, we need to cut space. We can't have too many high cost followers. So I mean, you can have Olivia, or you can have Janna, or you can have like Anathema Piece, or you can have Janna, and people just decided, well, we're going to cut down copies of Janna. Makes sense. Same thing for Amalia. Like Amalia is as strong as ever, but again, like we're in a situation now where the game is a lot faster than it was before, and then on top of that, Gildaria attacks. So all the cards are still strong. It's just that they're stronger cards now. So next up we have Aggro Abyss. So Aggro Abyss, I think we already covered this. It's basically the same deck. Just go super wide and then hit face when you can, and then they die. This deck list looks really similar. The only difference, I think, is that this guy runs 2 copies of Olivia. Olivia is really good in this deck, by the way, because you can go like Olivia and then Devious Lesser Mummy, and then you Super Evo the Olivia, crash in, and then this one goes face for 5. So you basically do 6 damage while healing, drawing 2 cards, and pushing damage. So that combo is extremely strong. And finally, we have an artifact portal list. So we didn't get all the top 4, but this guy only posted the artifact portal list. I suspect it's because like he probably only really brought 1 deck. Like he might have brought a second deck, but he was like, no matter what happens, I'm playing artifact. So I think that's kind of a Chad move, to be honest. But anyway, this list is similar to the artifact list that we saw before. I think the 2 key things to note is he's running 2 copies of the Sylvia here. So Sylvia, of course, the heal 4 option is actually really good in this current meta. So again, I wouldn't be surprised to see more copies of this moving forward. He does run 2 copies of Karula, so I can only suspect that he runs this because he's scared of having too many high cost followers in his deck. And I guess like sometimes it can be a little bit hard to play Karula if you're out of Super Evo points. And of course, he still runs 3 copies of Orcus, right? So Orcus, of course, is quite greedy for Super Evo points. So I guess he didn't want to have too many high cost followers that are all trying to go for the same Evo point usage. But apart from that, like, it's running the same cards. So 3 copies of Fly Icarus, so you don't run resources, Artifact Catapult, which works really well with Carnelia. So that is pretty much it for the 2 tournament deck lists. And next we're going to move to the tier list. So we have split them into 3 different tiers, but I think there's a lot of really strong options for tier 1 at the moment. mean, Aggro Abyss, originally I didn't really have this on my radar, but seeing how successful it is within tournaments has made me put in tier 1. I think, in particular, this deck is tier 1 because of the 2-deck best of 1 format, where basically by including this in your lineup, you have a wider flexibility. So I think this tiering is accurate from this perspective of tournament usage, but I'm not sure it's tier 1 for like, oh, I'm going to bring this to ladder and just smash everything. But aggro fast decks are never bad in ladder, so I think tier 1 is fine for this. Artifact Portal remains the 50-50 deck against everything. Obviously, the better you are, the higher that number will get, so it won't be 50-50, it'll be higher than that. But I think it still has the tools to beat everything as long as you use your cards correctly. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Mid-range Sword, we're seeing a lot of it on ladder, actually, and in tournament play. I think, again, mid-range Sword, it has a lot of good matchups, right? I think it's good against aggro decks, generally speaking, as long as you draw your 2-drop. And then also, it has a not so bad matchup against Roach Forest, so makes sense. Of course, we have Roach Forest back in tier 1, so there was a bit of a scare, wasn't there, guys? Like, we were scared of Ward Haven destroying this deck. But the problem is, right, like, yeah, Ward Haven destroys Roach Forest, but the problem is, like, all the other tier 1 decks basically destroy Ward Haven, and even the decks which you think would probably, like, get beaten by Ward Haven don't. Like, for example, like, you'd think Aggro Abyss would be weak against Ward Haven, right? But Ward Haven is actually really susceptible to early game aggro, so you don't even get the chance to go Wilbert plus, like, you know, Ether without dying, pretty much. So that's actually the biggest problem at the moment. Like, you can't safely Wilbert Evo, so if you can't do that, you can't Ether Evo either, and then from there, you're basically screwed, and especially if you're not going second. Like, if you're going second, you can, like, cheat out Wilbert, and you might be able to cheat out, like, Ether or whatever, right? But if you're going first, you don't really have that leeway at all. So once all of these other decks kick out Ward Haven from the meta, then of course Roach Forest is going to go back up, right? And so I do think this gives an opportunity for mid-range Sword to potentially start running cards like Urius if they think that Roach will be an actual problem. And that's an adaptation I think we'll see more in tournament play than we will on ladder. On ladder, you have to be good against everything. But in tournament play, you might be like, well, Roach is really popular amongst like the top tier players here, so I want to run a deck, or I want to run both my decks in my lineup that beat Roach. So I'm going to run more anti-Roach tech within my lineup. So that's a consideration. Don't know if you want to do that for, you know, the first set of kickoffs because there's so many players there and the field would be really wide. But obviously in the knockout portion, you might want to do that. And then we have Spellboost Rune as the final tier 1. So tier 1, I mean, like this deck is still really strong. Like it's got a bit of a polarizing matchup spread, right? It's bad against like aggro decks, but it remains really strong against decks like Artifact, mid-range Sword, but it loses to Roach and Aggro Abyss in my opinion. So I think it's fine to bring this deck in general on ladder. Pray you don't run into those two decks, or you know, at least do even out because you beat all the other ones. So yeah, Spellboost still a good deck. Tier 2, we've got mid-range Abyss. So this one is really popular on the ladder. So this is with the new Charon legendary. So you keep building these boards which are really, really hard to answer, and then the moment your opponent can't clear everything, boom, you just finish them off. So mid-range Abyss is quite strong. Puppet Portal, despite its good tournament placing, I do think it's a bit susceptible to the current meta, honestly. I think it's quite bad against Roach, for instance. And to be honest, I think there's a few decks like mid-range Sword as well. It's quite good against Puppet Portal. So I just don't feel like it's quite in the tier 1 space right now. Ramp Dragon is something that I'm optimistic about, but I don't know if it's actually a tier 2 deck. It's probably a tier 3 deck, to be honest. On day 1, it was quite good when a lot of decks were unoptimized, so you had a lot of time in order to ramp up and then basically have that crazy like low play point Olivias and stuff like that. But I think now with the decks more optimized and more aggressive meta, you might be dead ahead of time. And also you really do need to draw like ramp early, because like the 5 cost that spawns like a billion Megalorcas, that card is really busted, but that alone can't really save you, right, if you're not ramping in time, because you do need to find time to play stuff like Fenny, or you need to find an opportunity to stabilize. In a lot of decks, I think like mid-range Sword, ironically, is a good matchup for you, but a lot of decks won't really give you that time, especially decks like Roach Forest, right? Like, you're just going to die. And if you skip a beat against Spellboost Rune, like their late game is even better than yours if your entire deck isn't like halved, right? So that's a problem as well. And then Artifact Portal is Artifact Portal. They're just going to spam, like, you know, deal 3 damage to your enemy leader. And it's really hard for you to clear that, to be honest, because all of your removal is basically 2/2s. But their boards are going to be so huge with Aluette, and then once they drop Browmere, I'm not even sure you can clear that properly. Like, you only have so many Twilight Drakes, and then you'll just die, or you might just die to Orcus, right? So, yeah, I mean, like, I think Dragon's in a weird spot right now. I think it could see play in tournaments, but, even though it looked promising in the first few days, I'm not sure if this actually has legs. We'll see. And then finally, we have Control Haven. I think Control Haven, it has some potential, but I think the issue with both Haven decks is that its early game is quite weak. And when you have a weak early game to this meta, you're basically entering mid game, and you have to have Saliphon Curve in order to somewhat stabilize, but you'll still have like, only 15 HP or something like that, and they'll continue to pressure you, and you never really get a chance to really kind of stabilize and drop your own game plan. I think Wardhaven is in a slightly better position, mainly because it has a really good match against Roach. But I don't think there's much Roach can really do if you go Wilbit into Ether. Like, the fact that you get Aura on everything is what really breaks the matchup. Like, Roach has to break through most of the boards using cards like Bale, right? But Bale has to target. So if they have like 3 wards that are really huge, and then the turn after they drop John, what can you do? Like, that 3-card combo, like turn 6 Wilbur, turn 7 Ether, turn 8 John, like, a lot of decks can deal with it, but Roach is not one of them. And I think that alone will give you some reason to bring this into a tournament lineup where you're expecting a Roach. But the problem is, if you bring Wardhaven, you're basically willingly engaging in a coin flip every time. And so basically you have this mind game where the Roach player is like, well, I think you're going to queue Wardhaven, so I'm not going to queue Roach. But they might also think, well, you know what? You're going to think I'm not going to queue Roach because you're playing Wardhaven, so I'm going to queue Roach anyway, right? But there's no real way for you to tell. Like, you're meeting a stranger for the first time. You can't know for certain whether or not they're going to play Wardhaven or not. And you can't know for certain whether or not they're going to play Roach or not, like on both sides, right? Which is why bringing Wardhaven is a little bit risky in a tournament format like that. But I think if you could find 2 decks that both be Roach, that would be an interesting lineup. So that's why I do optimistically think Wardhaven has a bit more of a chance than the other decks. But yeah, the main issue with Wardhaven is like, it's very predictable. Despite the fact that you go very tall in terms of the health, it's not necessarily that big of a threat for a lot of decks. They can usually clear most of your stuff. And once you are actually out of Super Evos with Wardhaven, it's really hard to fight back to the board and like regain a winning position. So you're basically all leaning on the fact that your first Wilbur into Ether has to basically win the game. And if you don't have Ether on curve, it can be pretty rough as well. So that's pretty much it for the current iteration of the tier list. Obviously, it will update over time, especially given the results from the upcoming tournaments. So the Shadowverse Open, obviously 1,000 players, I think for over 2 days, actually. So that'll definitely be updated over time. And then we'll also have a look at the ladder data as well over the course of the few weeks. So expect this to change. But at the moment, it's my current thoughts on the meta. So that's pretty much it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to like and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time.